Now about 4 minutes after 7. We're a little bit late coming upstairs. Again, this is Owen Sound City Council. It is December 2nd, 2019, for those that might be watching over the next couple of nights on Rogers Cable. This is the very first day of our second year as council. We were sworn in exactly 1 year ago last night, which, as Kermit the Frog says, time's fun when you're having flies. We had a closed session that started at 6:30 p.m. During the closed session, council reviewed minutes from the closed session of council meeting held on November 18th, and council reviewed minutes from closed sessions of the Owen Sound Housing Company, Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation, held on November 19th. Council discussed one matter regarding personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal employees, and labor relations or employee negotiations respecting job performance, and no direction was given. Down to number 4, call for additional business. Anyone? Councillor Gregg?
Have additional item regarding the upcoming blood donor clinic.
Brandon, do you have your hand up there? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I have one respecting board and committee vacancies.
Other staff? Seeing no hands. Council again, seeing none. Good. Keep going. I think it's going to be a big meeting. Disclosure pecuniary interest. Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I have a pecuniary interest in item 14B. In the community services minutes, the Harrison Park Inn lease agreement is of an investment in another restaurant. Actually, Travis will do the community service minutes too.
Good. Thank you. Confirmation of council minutes. Councillor Kepke, you've got the magic list.
Thank you, Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the minutes of the regular council meeting held on November 18, 2019, as printed, be adopted.
All in favor? That's carried. 6B.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the minutes of the closed session of the regular council meeting held on November 18, 2019, as printed, be adopted.
And all in favor? That's carried. 6C. Oh, we've covered off 6. Okay, sorry. Thank you. So I guess we're down to number 7 then.
Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that City Council now move into Committee of the Whole to consider public meetings, deputations and presentations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports of city staff, consent agenda, committee minutes, matters postponed, motions for which notice was previously given, and additional business.
Great. All in favor? That is carried. So now we're at Committee of the Whole. We have no public meetings. We have several deputations, and clearly some people have some interest in some of them. So good to see everyone out here tonight. We wish you came out to our council meetings every night. I don't think anyone pays any attention the rest of the time. First of all, we want to welcome Anne-Marie Shaw, Director of Housing in Grey County. She has a presentation on housing and homelessness that we want to get the message out to the community, what Grey County's doing, and inform everyone. So you have to push a little button there. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm here tonight just to give you an idea of where the county is moving forward in their housing and homelessness plan. A little bit about Grey County and what we do. I can keep talking. So a little bit about Grey County and what we do. Grey County owns and operates 997 units of affordable housing. Our affordable housing is spread out throughout Grey County, and with our largest number of homes being in Owen Sound. We have 500 homes located in Owen Sound. We work with a number of nonprofits, 9 nonprofits throughout the county that also provide 494 units of housing. That most of them are rent geared to income, some are affordable, and some are market rents. We have housings with supports, so that would be a housing unit that would provide a little bit of support, maybe if someone needed help with their laundry or medication, in order to enable them to live independently. We have 80 rent supplements with private landlords throughout the county, and in 2017 and 19, we are building 56 new units of affordable housing. The county is also responsible for the housing or the community homelessness prevention program. We have a number of programs under that, most noticeably our emergency housing outreach program, in which we run through the Y Housing. Just recently, as of yesterday, Y Housing has opened up their 24-hour emergency housing line for the winter. It is a matter of calling 211 now. If someone is in need of emergency housing at any time, they can call 211 and they will be helped through those services. So a great move forward and a great addition to the emergency services that are provided. We also have the investment in affordable housing programs. We have home ownership, in which we provide a 5% down payment. We have our Ontario Renovates, which helps with some renovations, such as maybe a new roof. We have a rental build program, a rent supplement program, and a secondary suites program. So what is a housing plan? So the county is mandated by the Housing Services Act in order to have a 10-year housing and homelessness plan. Our vision for the plan is, or mainly I guess our objective is affordable housing for all, that everyone deserves to have an affordable house. It is a requirement also under the Housing Services Act that at that 5-year mark that the plan be reviewed. So our plan started in 2014, we're now in 2019, and so we did undergo a process for the last 8 months in which we were gathering information from community members and agencies in order to review our plan and set some targets. So we heard loud and clear the need for more housing stock, and that's all kinds of stock, rental specifically, maintain the existing stock we have. There's a lot of great housing out there, but as we know, it's aging, so what can we do in order to keep that stock so we don't lose any of it? The need for more mental health supports in our communities, a system for people that are experiencing homelessness, and more awareness of what poverty and food insecurity and unstable housing means for the residents of Grey County. And looking at working with our municipal partners and how we can provide incentives to for developers to build more types of housing, and also recognizing the need for culturally appropriate housing. One of the issues that we do, or 2 issues, I guess, that are facing every community in Ontario is our vacancies and our affordability. If you look in Grey County in 2014, we had a healthy vacancy rate. Anything over 4% is considered healthy. It was around just under 4% at that, or sorry, just under 5% at that time. And now we're under 2%. We're about 1.8% vacancy. So there's not a lot of stock and a lot out there to choose from. And also looking at prices. If you look in 2014, the average 1-bedroom was $781, and now in 2018, $869, and we know in 2019 even higher than that. So when you have that perfect storm of a low vacancy rate and high rentals, it does make it increasingly difficult for those that have a lower income to find housing. Throughout our plan, we used the definition of affordable housing, which the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation uses. So it's 30% of annual gross household, and for renters, that would include your costs of utilities and rent. Some of the strategies that we came up with 4 main strategies throughout our plan. It's creating more affordable housing, preserving the stock that we have, reducing chronic homelessness, and chronic homelessness is considered someone who's been homeless for more than 6 months in a year. It doesn't necessarily have to be consecutive, and also increasing the availability of supportive housing options. So what we're looking at doing over the next 5 years, we're looking at completing phase 3 of our affordable housing build in Owen Sound. Right now, there's 90 units that have site plan approval. We have 36 6 of them that are built so far, and we're wanting to increase that for a total of 90 units. We have a build going on in Durham right now of 16 units we are hoping to complete. And actually, it's not us, it's actually a private developer. We're looking to provide additional rent supplements, continue to explore options, and identify any surplus lands or vacant lands for future builds. The build that we have in Durham right now, the county was able to identify a plot of land that we had that was surplus. We went out for an expression of interest and a request for proposal to find out what could be built on that land, looking at waiving development charges and other incentives that we could provide in order to produce some affordable units. So it's a great way to work with a private developer to get some affordable units in with their market units that they are looking to build. And we also entered into a 20-year agreement, so those units have to remain affordable for 20 years. So we're looking at various programs and opportunities to create more affordable housing. We're wanting to preserve the existing stock that we do have by updating our building condition assessments and energy audits, and always exploring energy savings initiatives and grants. We are looking to reduce chronic homelessness. We're in the middle of creation of a homeless response table. We're working with hospitals, so Grey Bruce Health Unit, Grey Bruce Health Services. We're mental health, so the Canadian our CMHA, and also our community partners that provide services to those that are experiencing homelessness, and ourselves in Bruce County. And what that table is looking at doing is providing those wraparound services. So we're looking at not only providing housing, but also providing those supports which is needed for someone to have a successful tenancy. We're looking at becoming a built-for-zero community, and what that means is looking at reducing chronic homelessness to zero. There's always going to be episodic homelessness. Something happens at night and someone ends up needing a place to stay. But for those that it is chronic homelessness in which we can create a system around that person to build in those supports so that when they're struggling, there always is someone there to call on, and that they don't end up back on the streets. So that is sort of working with that collective impact framework. So we're looking at bringing together key partners to all work together to solve homelessness instead of all trying to do it on our own. And also looking to increase availability to supportive housing. We're looking at using some of the existing services, the existing stock that we have, and how can we work with mental health services, and if we're providing the bricks and mortar and they're providing the supports, and so we can increase the number of units that are providing supports within Grey County. And those are sort of our 4 main areas that we're looking at over the next 5 years, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Go ahead, John.
It's nice to meet you again, Ms. Shaw. I think we met a few months ago at a founding meeting, more or less, for Indwell, which is a not-for-profit that has a proven track record in Woodstock, the town of Simcoe. London invited them to deal with the graduates out of the Parkwood program, and of course they've done many things in Hamilton. So I hope to have further discussions with you informally about that. Are there other nonprofits that are really moving aggressively in this area? Can you speak to that?
So the county has 9 nonprofits in which we work with, and so they are nonprofit housing providers. They're not necessarily a church provider or other agencies that you might find in the city. We don't have a lot of those organizations in Grey County, but with the nonprofits that we do have, we have a couple that are very aggressive when it comes to building housing and wanting to build more. So right now it's more of a factor of finding those funding opportunities in order to support them in developing housing, and looking at funds throughout the province. Grey County itself is providing $1.5 million towards some housing to be built in the next couple of years. There's some provincial funds that hopefully are going to be announced soon, and some other opportunities. So there is capacity. It's finding the funds to do it.
Others? Richard, go ahead.
We've heard the waiting list is fairly significant in Grey County. Would you have some sense, that 30% target, how many people would you say in the county, and you may not have the exact figure, but even a ballpark, are exceeding that on a month-to-month basis?
Yes, there's quite a, so 30%. I don't have exact numbers, but even in a ballpark, there are quite a few people when it comes to that are in rental housing, specifically in rental housing, that are paying more than that 30%, more so than homeowners. But as rents increase and as the cost of housing increases, then we see that number increasing too.
Can you tell us how many people are on the waiting list for affordable units?
Yep. So waitlist is it's a moving target, so it's very difficult to put a number out there. But I could say we probably have about 800 people in Grey County that need affordable housing. That's not to say that there isn't more, but those are the ones that are on our wait list. And in order to be on our wait list for a one-bedroom, you have to make under $31,000 a year. The average person in our one-bedrooms that lives with us makes about $17,000 a year. So we really are looking at people that have a very low income.
Is it possible to be on a waiting list in more than one municipality?
It is, and that's kind of what skews our wait list. So when we look at the wait list, we look at one person on there in Grey County, their name. But what we do find is we do get a lot of people from Bruce and Simcoe and Toronto and Hamilton and whatnot. So you can put your name on any wait list. The province is actually changing the way they're running the wait list, which is going to help us out. So a person is going to have to narrow down their choices as to where they would like to stay, because their selection choices are going to be a lot less. So sometimes a person will say, well, I need housing, and rightly so, because they really do need housing. So they're going to put their name on every list, every building that we have. But then when we go to offer them, maybe they really just want Hanover because that's where their doctor is. So we're going to work on narrowing that list down over the next year or so, and I think that'll give us a much better picture of what housing needs are for Grey County and the specific municipalities too.
And though we're focusing on Grey County, if we've got people on the list from all over, that would suggest that it's right across the province that we've got a housing shortage, not just here, but it's here that we're paying attention to.
Yes.
You said something about culturally appropriate housing. What's that?
So we have a project that we're working with Mowikwadong, and they have hired outreach workers working with Indigenous outreach workers working with Indigenous people that are requiring housing. So just making sure that there are those cultural supports in place to support people through that. Yeah.
And two more quick questions. Private people private developers getting help must keep the homes affordable for 20 years. You've got a formula for affordable?
Yes. So the affordable rent is set by the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation if they're going through our programs. So they look at 80% of market rent. So for instance, right now, CMHC says that the average rent for a one-bedroom might be $780. We know it's actually a little bit more, but we do use their numbers. So right now, the affordable unit for one bedroom would be $614, and that's including utilities. So very much affordable.
Good, thank you very much. No other questions? Brian, go ahead.
Anne Marie, I've got notes here, but I don't have a date. So I'm assuming, or I'm thinking maybe 6 months ago when you spoke to us at the county, the waiting list was 600. Now you're saying it's 800. Does that number go up and down? Or is it actually going up that fast?
It's going up that fast, and a lot of those, about 30% of our wait list now are non-Grey County residents too, and again, that's having an impact on our wait list.
And those are people, not families, correct?
Those are households, so
Okay.
it'd be a household.
Right, okay. And thanks so much for coming to do this presentation. That was a
Anytime.
big help, thanks.
Seeing no other questions, again, thanks for coming in and coming to the lower tier and informing us what you're doing up at the upper tier throughout Grey County. And I think it's important for people to hear, because from time to time we hear that we're not doing anything and try to explain that there's an awful lot going on and a lot of thought going into it. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next deputation is John Farmer and Joachim Ostertag with regard to violence prevention. And there you are already.
Pardon us while we make the PowerPoint. Good evening, Council. Good evening, neighbors. For those of you I have not had the privilege of meeting, my name is John Farmer. I'm here on behalf of Violence Prevention Grey Bruce. I come bearing the regrets of Joachim Ostertag, who's currently on bed rest following back surgery that didn't go quite as well as he wanted. So forgive his absence. I will speak not on his behalf, but for his part of the presentation today. Violence Prevention Grey Bruce is our local Violence Against Women Community Coordinating Committee. Through the course of the brief 10 minutes that we get to share together, I'll go over who we are, what we do, give you a bit of a picture of what violence and gendered violence specifically looks like in our communities, and I will close with a request, because this year marks the 30th anniversary of the shooting at L'École Polytechnique on December 6th, 1989. Violence Prevention Grey Bruce is a community roundtable. We are composed of more than 30 member organizations who are all in some way working in gendered violence prevention or response. That includes police services, mental health and addiction and social services, victim services, healthcare partners, Mawikwadong, Neishingaming and Sagin family well-being programs, the violence against women sector, Bruce Grey Child and Family Services, the justice system, arts organizations, and community members. The organization was founded in the mid-90s, although it has had several names since that time and faced various levels of funding, because we are made possible thanks to funding through the Ministry of, oh, they change the name all the time on me, MCCSS, Ministry of Community, Children and Social Services. We meet quarterly as a committee of the whole, and we also have specific subcommittees that are dedicated to different topics related to gendered violence. That includes domestic and sexual violence, human trafficking, senior safety and elder abuse, as well as general public awareness raising. Our work is split really in those two fields of being a table where those organizations that are working in this field can come together, can talk about trends, can work to improve our collaboration, because we know that when folks are working with the same types of organizations, for the public to go to multiple doors that aren't talking to each other is really not helpful for them. So the better that we work together, the better the services that we can provide to this community, and the less suffering there will be in this community. We work collaboratively that way. We also work to raise public awareness, because gendered violence is a problem. It's a problem around the world. It's a problem in Grey and Bruce counties. It's a problem in Owen Sound, and yet it is a problem that is not frequently talked about, despite impacting so many people. And just like that check engine light in your car, if you don't pay attention to the indicators of the problem's going to get worse. We have the ultimate goal of making our communities a place where all women, children, and people are able to live healthy lives free from violence. Our ongoing projects include the first anti-human trafficking committee to be struck in Grey and Bruce, which we launched just over a year and a half ago thanks to a grant. That grant is coming to a close in March, and we will conclude with both a framework that organizations can carry on with, but also with public events March 26th and 27th to talk about human trafficking generally. It is a problem, like I said, in Grey and Bruce counties. We're also currently in the midst of a 16 Days of Activism campaign where we're releasing articles and promoting other community voices that are raising awareness about a variety of issues related to gendered violence. The 16 Days of Activism, for those of you not familiar with it, is a campaign that runs internationally starting on November 25th, which is the day for the elimination of violence against women, and which concludes on December the 10th, which is International Human Rights Day. We're currently also running a program, well, a contest for youth in grades 7 to 12 in Grey and Bruce counties to create pieces of art that raise awareness about healthy and unhealthy relationships. You've got a poster. That's amazing. Share it with your friends and schoolmates. There's cash prizes. When people learn how to have healthy relationships and start these conversations early in life, they're safer, and the people around them are safer throughout their lives. We're going to be hosting documentary screenings. We annually support the Sisters in Spirit events, specifically raising awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We do public outreach, and we annually support the December 6th commemoration as well. I'll be talking more about that in a moment, and you'll notice that the final thing on my list is a snapshot, which I will speak about right now. There it is. We collected, over the end of 2018 and start of 2019, we collected snapshots of statistics from various partners of our committee. This was part of a kind of action in a box activity that was done by committees like ours all across southwestern Ontario to begin to develop some sort of common metric for the violence that is happening in our communities. We chose a selection of fields that our partners could report on, and those numbers are really small up there, but I included the full PDF in your minutes. You'll notice that for police domestic violence calls, over that 181-day period, there were 339 calls to police related to domestic violence. That works out to almost 2 calls per day. Now, during that same period, the violence against women organizations working in Grey and Bruce counties, so that includes the Women's Centre, Bruce and Grey, which has their shelter and second stage housing right here in Owen Sound, as well as Women's House Serving Bruce and Grey, which runs the shelter in Kincardine, as well as outreach and counseling services across Grey and Bruce counties. During that same 181-day period, they received over 4,700 calls. Now, that includes calls for immediate service, people who are experiencing violence in the moment and are looking for support and information about resources. That also includes people who experienced historic violence, whether that was domestic or sexual, and who are reaching out for service. We know that people who experience violence are not always ready to ask for help while they're experiencing that violence. Experiencing gendered violence of any type impacts the rest of a person's life. And that's why it's important to have services available for the rest of that person's life if they're a survivor of violence. I mentioned the organizations specifically serving women in our community. There are also specifically sexual violence counseling available through the hospital, and at the men's program we offer the Male Survivor Program, which is one-to-one counseling for men who experienced sexual violence when they were adolescents or children. We know that in Canada, 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence in their lifetimes, and the same is true for 1 in 6 men. Gendered violence does not discriminate by gender, but the violence that people experience based on their sex and gender is different. You will also notice that these statistics do not include the services offered by the hospitals, by private counselors, and this is only the tip of the iceberg. There's also a single femicide during that 6-month period. A woman was killed in Grey and Bruce counties by her partner. She was one of 48 women who were killed in 2018 in Ontario as a result of domestic and gender-based violence. This is not a new problem. Bringing us to December 6th. The National Day for Action and Remembrance of Violence Against Women. It was established in 1991 by an act of parliament after the shooting in 1989. The 14 women who were killed that day were killed specifically because they were women. That was an act of hate and terror directed at women. It's 30 years later, there are people in this room who were not alive during that time, myself included, and yet this day remains a symbol of that violence. It has not stopped since 1989. The Toronto van attack was also motivated by similar means, or a similar ideology. This day is so important for Canada that it's one of the days on which the national flag at federal facilities is lowered to half-mast. The day is a commemoration of the women who were killed. It's a day to reflect on the pervasive problem of violence against women, and to consider all of the women and people who've been killed as results of gender-based violence since that time. These are the 14 women. On Friday at the vigil at Georgian College, we will be reading their names, we will hold their pictures, we will remember them and honor them. And we invite everyone in the room today, everyone in Grey and Bruce counties, especially in Owen Sound, to join us and participate. There's a poster. That's also online. It's also listed on the Owen Sound events calendar, so feel free to access your local municipal website for information about what's happening in your community. As I mentioned, it's one of a handful of days in which the federal flag is lowered to half-mast, and as part of our commemoration for the 30th anniversary, we are requesting that flags in municipalities and at the county level across Grey and Bruce be lowered to half-mast to recognize the importance of this anniversary and the pervasive problem of gendered violence and violence against women in our communities. A couple weeks ago, we presented at Grey County, and they were kind enough to pass a motion recognizing our request. The second part of my request is that members of council join us on Friday at noon to stand against gendered violence and violence against women. If the City of Owen Sound would like to organize anything or promote this information through their social media channels, anything like that, I am happy to work with you or staff to that effect. But my request today is specifically that council move to lower the flags to half-mast.
Good, thank you. So again, the memorial is at Georgian College Friday, this Friday the
This
6th,
Friday.
and 5 days at 12 p.m.
At 12 noon from,
12 noon.
Yep, dress for the weather, and parking is free.
So outdoors?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Unless it's blowing a gale, in which case we will be inside, but.
Okay,
yeah.
good, thank you. Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, John, for making that presentation. And thank you for the work that you do. This is one of the presentations that does come to council annually, and it's probably one of the most heartfelt presentations, and it's saddened to see how often these kinds of instances still happen daily. I would ask with the motion to lower that flag to half-mast for you on December 6th. And I'm hoping as well that we could waive the notice of motion requirement so we could get that done for this Friday.
Right, so that's to lower the city flags to half-mast on Friday the 6th.
So I'll make the motion to waive the notice of motion procedure.
So first is to waive the notice of motion. All in favor? That is carried.
Thank you, Worship. And then my following request, my next motion would be to lower the flag to half-mast on December 6th.
All in favor? And that is carried. Okay, any questions, any comments? Councillor O'Leary, or Deputy Mayor, sorry.
Thank you, Worship. John, I just wanted to commend you on the title you had for one of your letters, Ending Violence Requires Men. Every boy wants to become a man. You can't be a man and be violent against a woman. The two don't go hand in hand, and I thought that was a catchy little phrase, so thanks for that.
Thank you.
Okay, others? Seeing no others, again, thank you for your presentation. I hope Mr. Ostertag is feeling better soon, and we may find out in a minute.
Yeah, thank you, and please do be in touch if as you're considering any decision that might impact gendered violence. That includes everything from housing and income to transportation.
Good.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Oh, and I'm confident that there will be councillors there. I've got to check my schedule, but I think I can be there, but confident we'll be there. Thank you. Next, 9C in our agenda is Sonia Ostertag and her friends, Fridays for Future.
Good evening.
Welcome. I'll get you to move over just so you're in front of the mic and then we can hear you.
Thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Sonia Ostertag, and I'm here with a wonderful team of young people, Taylor Shepard, Aslan Newfield, Abigail Shepard, Nieva Newfield, Eloise Farla, and Aidan Randall. We represent the Fridays for Future Bruce Grey Owen Sound group, which is about peacefully demanding that our local leaders act on the science to play their part in halting global heating before it is too late. The movement, Fridays for Future, began with Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg. I'm sure you've heard of her by now. She has sparked a global movement to tell politicians to take action. On March 15th, just outside of the City Hall, and on May 3rd this year, students and supportive parents and adults joined in this movement in global and national days of protest. Students from OSDSS led the Fridays for Future strikes with their supporters, and they striked every Friday at Owen Sound City Hall until summer 2019. This September, we had 2 amazing strikes right outside. I'm sure you noticed. We were loud. Hundreds of local students and their supporters, we all came together and joined a global strike on September 20th and 27th, and over 7 million people in 185 countries took part. So I think there's a really growing movement in Owen Sound and the world for climate action. And just on Friday, we met again outside of your doors, and nearly 100 citizens stood in front of City Hall to demand action. So there's really a lot of interest and support for climate action locally and abroad. You've probably heard about the UN International Panel on Climate Change. Well, the report is startling. We need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 50% in the next 10 years. That's by 2030. We need to be carbon neutral by 2050. We're really far away from those goals. Canada has only committed to a 30% greenhouse gas reduction. In our Paris Agreement, we would reduce by 30% below 2005 levels in the next 10 years. Our current trajectory is a 4% reduction. And with a number of additional policies and measures that are still under development, we would only reach an 18% reduction. We are so far away from where we need to be. We need to drastically reduce emissions. The world must rapidly transition our energy, land, urban, and industrial systems. This is unprecedented, the scale at which we need to change the way our lives work. We need deep reductions of emissions in all sectors. There are many options available, but we really need to work together to reach these emission targets. So that's sort of the general outlook. It's really, really scary. It's really terrible. My name is Sonia Ostertag. I'm a parent. I'm an environmental scientist. I live in Owen Sound, and I lead research in the Arctic on human and environmental health. I've seen firsthand the impacts of climate change, and the impacts up north are far more devastating than what we're feeling here in Owen Sound at this time. I've been studying climate change and related impacts for nearly 20 years. I'm absolutely outraged by the slow pace of action. We've had the science for so many years. This is the 25th anniversary of international negotiations on climate action, and we are so far from where we need to be. Global emissions are still rising. Now, 10 years after I started being an activist around climate change, I have children. I'm heartbroken for my children. Future generations are likely to inherit a planet that we have made inhospitable by out-of-control emissions. The science is clear. We have the information we need, and we have the technology we need. When I was a baby, when I was 5 years old, we had an excuse for not acting. We didn't have wind turbines and solar collectors. We have the technology we need to move on making improvements. I'm pleading with you to listen to the voices of our children and youth, some of whom are here today. They depend on us. They cannot vote, and by the time they can, it will be too late. We need to cut our emissions by 50% in the next 10 years. The Climate Action Team will present a recommendation for Owen Sound to adopt a Climate Action Task Force on January 14th during the Operations Committee meeting. This task force will create a climate action plan for the city and coordinate with the city's strategic planning process. I urge you to adopt a climate action task force. This is an excellent first step, or an excellent step among others, towards making Owen Sound more sustainable and resilient.
Hi, my name's Ellie. The icebergs are melting and I'm very scared for the polar bears. Me and my family are doing everything we can. There's no planet B, so we need to protect Mother Earth.
Hi everybody, my name is Nieva. I'm doing everything I can to stop climate change. I am vegan. My carbon footprint is very small. Polar bears, elephants, and so many other animals are going extinct. We need to act now. Work and school won't matter if we don't have a planet. I am scared for my future. I need you to help me. We can't solve a problem without treating it as one.
Hi, my name is Abigail Bellhope. My mom says hope is stronger than fear. I'm hopeful you will help me see the world. I'm not asking you to believe in Santa. Obviously, he is real. I'm asking you to believe in climate change. I need you to believe in my future. By declaring a climate emergency, you will give me hope.
My name is Aiden. Most of us know about the Titanic and about how people thought this ship was unsinkable, and how in its first voyage it struck an iceberg. When it struck the iceberg, the crew knew about it, but they didn't tell most of the people on the boat because they thought they might panic. But what happened before it struck that iceberg? They were riding along in luxury. They had a swimming pool, restaurants, everything they may ask for. But up in the captain's offices, They started receiving warnings. They told the captain. And he said, "Oh, I'm a good captain. Full speed ahead." A little bit later, the radio man came and said, "Captain, I heard there's icebergs about 50 miles ahead." "Oh, don't worry, I've driven through things like this before. This boat is unsinkable. Full speed ahead." Sometimes people think about the world the same way as the luxury on that ship. Our economy is doing well. We're moving ahead. Our standard of living is greater than ever. But they kept going. They went full speed ahead. And when the iceberg came, it was too late. And they drove right into something they could have prevented. And look what happened. We're in the same boat with climate change. Emissions are higher than ever. The scientists are giving us warnings. Are we going to listen to the signs before it's too late? Thank you.
My name is Taylor, and I'm very worried about my future. Every morning I hear talk on the kitchen radio about climate change, extreme weather, flooding, wildfires, and refugee crisis. I could turn off the radio and ignore it because sometimes it feels so overwhelming. It's such a big problem, and I'm only one person. I'm asking for your help. So what can we do as a community to prepare? How can we make kids like me and my sisters feel safe? We are asking you to declare a climate emergency because that is the first step to working on the problem. We are here to present this petition to declare a climate emergency, and the petition has been signed by 674 people. The City of Owen Sound should declare a climate emergency because the impacts are already causing serious loss of life and destroying vital ecosystems. The global average temperature, atmospheric greenhouse gases, and ocean acidity are already at dangerous levels. Society has shown in the past how quickly we can make changes when facing extreme threats. It is inexcusable to continue with climate-damaging policies that put us all in an even greater danger. That means when you make plans for the city, you'll think of the environment first. Please take action. Thank you.
My name is Aslan. I'm very concerned about climate change. 2 years ago, I did a project on animal agriculture and the environment, including ocean dead zones and deforestation. My family and I have made the switch to a plant-based lifestyle. We ask our councillors to implement a municipality-wide climate emergency response, which includes publicly acknowledging the climate emergency, reviewing the council's strategic plan, creating a foundation for climate emergency action, and implementing a climate emergency plan. We are not asking for a motion at this time. However, we request that you seriously consider declaring a climate emergency or crisis for Owen Sound and commit to concrete climate action as you develop the city's next 5-year strategic plan. We will return at a later date to request a motion from City Council to declare a climate emergency for Owen Sound. We need your help. We need you to help our community make positive changes so we can have a future. Thank you.
I want to thank Ali Neva, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Abigail, Aiden, Taylor, Aslan, and the grown-up Sonia. I met with Sonia, Aslan, Taylor, Abigail, and Neva, I think I've got the names right, on Thursday. I thought you guys were going to be nervous. No, you didn't show it. I felt more nervous than you looked. You did a great job. We had a good talk without a room full of people. In fact, you'll probably find that the room is globally warmed at this moment with this many people in it. We had toques and hats on and we went here and we were shivering for about an hour. But a great conversation, and I learned something from these kids. I know you're not asking for anything right away, but I think, Richard, go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship. I did come prepared with a motion, even though you're not asking for one. Now, it's not a motion to declare a climate emergency yet, because my personal belief is if you're going to declare something like that, you've got to be prepared to take action immediately. So the motion that I'd like to put on the table to start the discussion is that staff prepare a report detailing actions we might take to deal with climate change, including a suggested course of action detailing how we can meet United Nations emissions targets of 45% by 2030 and net zero by 2050.
Other councillors, discussion? Councillor Tamming, go ahead.
I too was deeply moved by this, and I'm going to support the motion. I don't need to amend the motion, but I would hope that staff would at least consider meeting with some of the presenters today and involving them at the very beginning with some of the discussions that staff might have. I know that's not usually done, but I think it would be a basic courtesy to those kids, those children, those young people, I apologize, who came here today.
Other discussions? Councillor Gregg?
Thanks, Mayor Body. And thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. I can speak from experience. I've got a child in the family who's also vegan, and for the animals and for the future of the planet. Wife that's plant-based, so I understand very much so, because that's a tremendous initiative to take in terms of cutting back on CO2 emissions and climate change actions. I do my best to bike or walk to work every day. I'm somebody that would be adamant on cutting back on school bus usage in this city, so you might not like me there if you are accustomed to getting a ride to school or riding on a school bus. I'm dreadfully opposed to the amount of school buses and traffic that we have in our community and the kind of emissions that we create. I know a city in Kingston has an initiative through their public transit plan where they've been able to work with school bus companies and bring about a solution on reducing transit consumption in the community. But I was reminded years ago, or I read it, a Boeing 747 consumes a gallon of fuel per second. And what we have, the problem in front of us is a tremendous consumption problem. When I heard that number, it's mind-boggling to think of it in that realm. So I'm quite supportive of having a report come back with tasks that we can implement across the city and try to improve our future for our residents and for the whole planet. So,
Others? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Yeah?
I just would like,
sorry.
I would just like the motion read again, please.
I move that staff prepare a report detailing actions we might take to deal with climate change, including a suggested course of action detailing how we can meet United Nations emissions targets of a 45% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050.
So do we not need a notice of motion for this one as well?
Well, because we're asking for a report, then
Okay.
no.
I don't know if we can go back a few screens. I don't want to waste much time, but I thought the idea was the presenters wanted to meet with staff to come up with concrete ideas.
Let's get the report, and then we'll go from there of who and what, and
I just don't want to see something created by staff without input from the presenters. That would concern me. That's all I'm saying.
changing it. Don't.
I think that we saw from the slide that these folks will be appearing at the Operations Committee in January and will be pitching the Operations Committee on involvement. I presume those of you on Operations will give it a full consideration, so I'm fine with the motion as it is now.
Good, so I'm going to call the question so we can keep moving here. All in favor? That is carried. There, you picked it off. So nothing would make us more happy if you'd stick around and watch the rest of the council meeting for the next 2 hours. I've got a funny feeling you don't want to do that, so we'll take a minute here, and this would be a perfect time to escape while you can. Just once we restart, please don't stand in the hallway and talk, because it echoes back in here. Thanks. Okay, you guys ready to come back? Now that it's quieting down, I don't know where we are. Public question period. Still people in the room. Anyone that wishes to ask a question of council? Not seeing anyone head for the microphone, I don't think. Correspondence received. We have no correspondence, which we need to consider. Staff report at 12A, starting with, I think, Kate. Report and development charges or something.
Thank you, Your Worship. This, I believe, will be our final report in the process of updating our development charges bylaw. The recommendation here is that Council approves the draft bylaw as it is presented, attached to this report. How we got here, we had issued an RFP for a consultant to help us in the redrafting of a development charges bylaw, as well as preparing the background study. That was awarded in the spring, and we worked on that through the summer. We had a public meeting on October the 16th, the study was completed on October 16th, and we held our public meeting on November 18th. Comments received at that meeting and subsequent to that meeting have been attached to this report for your reference. The purpose of this report is to seek council approval of the bylaw, including the rates to be charged and any discretionary exemptions for council's consideration. Attached to this report is a memo prepared by our consultants reviewing several requests that were made at the public meeting and questions that have previously come through council detailing the implications of 4 options related to the rates. They discussed moving forward with the fully calculated rates with reduced services approved at the meeting that we held in November. This was the option that is included in the draft bylaw that's attached. Other options may include maintaining the existing DC rates, which is approximately $7,000 per residential unit, allowing for an extended moratorium on residential development charges. However, in this circumstance, it must be noted that the DC reserve must be funded for all discretionary exemptions, including blanket waiving of fees. Allowing a development charge exemption for purpose-built residential housing. This doesn't really affect the rates, but it does add an additional standard for discretionary exemptions. Again, however, it should be noted that any discretionary exemptions would have to be funded through the tax rate. And then finally, an option to not impose DCs. Should council entertain the option of an extended moratorium, staff would recommend that no DC bylaw be passed and not to impose DCs on any development. And in this case, the lost revenue would be approximately $2 million, or in other words, the anticipated revenue through the fully levied charge would be approximately $2 million that we can use against growth-related capital moving forward. Other than the updated rates and the addition of the purpose-built residential exemption, the development charges bylaw remains consistent with the previous bylaw. Some minor wording changes have been highlighted in order to make the bylaw clearer and facilitate its application and interpretation around apartments and multi-unit developments. With that, I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Maybe I'll ask one. If we were to phase them in, we know when we gave the holiday and waived collection, they're still on the books, they still accumulated, and it took tax dollars out of the regular tax to go into development charges, correct?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Not sure that I can. This past term, past 5 years, we set development charges at X amount, doesn't matter. Then we waived collecting them, correct?
Correct.
And by waiving that, by having set them and then waived them, it meant that we still had to find money elsewhere to put into the development charge reserves.
Yeah, so along those lines, because we didn't collect the development charges, we weren't able to use development charges against the capital cost of some of our growth-related capital or even partial growth-related capital projects. So over the last 5 years, any capital that we undertook, whether it was partially or fully growth-related, we did not apply any development charges to that, and we had to fully pay for the project through the tax levy.
Okay, did we have to take tax dollars and put them into that reserve account to bring it up?
No, but it sort of, one balanced out the other. It worked out to be equal to the amount that we funded through the capital budget, would have been equal to the amount of development charges that we would have received over that period.
Okay. I guess it's a statement of how complicated this is when I'm asking these questions 5 years later for, I don't know, maybe the second time that I've gone through this and I don't understand them. Richard, go ahead.
I'd just like to ask the director if we decided that, you know, I'm pretty happy overall with the recommendation. I'm just unhappy with the almost $12,000 figure jumping in after a 5-year break. So I'm just wondering what sort of actions could we take to bring that figure down while moving forward with the resolution?
Sorry, you asked about phasing then?
Well, phasing or capping or finding some way to reduce the impact of the development charge.
Thank you.
Certainly, council has the option of setting a development charge that you see fit. If we were to set one rate, we would prorate how much funding is applied to every capital project on that basis. So for example, if we were to set a DC that's 50% of what the fully recommended development charge would be, we would have available 50% of the anticipated funding that the study anticipated for those future capital projects. Alternatively, if you wanted to reduce the charge, you could re-examine that list of capital projects itself and perhaps take some of those projects out of the calculation, in which case that charge would come down. There's options about phasing in as well, keeping in mind that there is an obligation to fund the reserve should you anticipate wanting to use the full amount of development charges for that full growth-related component once the capital is undertaken. Some projects that I would point out, if we're looking sort of at a cash flow basis, we know the 10th Street Bridge is underway. Currently, the development charge study anticipates raising $500,000 against the capital cost of that bridge. If we reduce the amount of development charges that we collect, we won't have that $500,000 to put against the bridge. We'll have to have a higher debenture payment, and ultimately those payments go onto the budget and are funded by the taxpayer. So that would be the implication of something like that.
Just one quick follow-up question. Yeah, I did have it on. So if we went back to the capital list and we looked at removing projects that we know are not going to take place during the 5 years of this development charge, would there be significant savings or moderate savings? Can you make a guesstimate?
I would have to work with our engineering and the department heads in each of those areas to know which projects are sort of already initiated or are set in stone versus anticipated, I suppose. But I do think that we could affect the charge by doing that.
Mr. Ritchie.
If I could, Your Worship, just my thoughts. Development charges are complicated for the most ratepayers. So phasing in, I would recommend you don't phase in. But what I would recommend to council, you know your community, select the number, the figure you can support in the face of people saying, why did you pick that number? To go back to ask Kate and our engineering and all our staff to go through the lists again to say, well, maybe this one doesn't apply. I think what I'm hearing is you're uncomfortable with the number being high. So pick a number that staff as a group can say, when we perhaps have people saying, we didn't like 12,000, but I was comfortable for the community, believing in development charges, growth paying for growth, that I could live with, and pick a number. I can't tell you the number. I might pick 5, you might pick 8, but at the end of the day, it's a number that you need to stand in the face of development saying, I don't think, in sound today, development can afford that number. You feel, knowing everything you know about what development is happening, that you feel it can, and move on. That's just my recommendation. I wouldn't phase it in. I think it just complicates an already complicated matter for everyone.
Thank you. So I'm going to do what we did 5 years ago. If you remember, I'm just, before we get any motions, I just ask you just make your comments on it. Go ahead, Scott, and we'll work our way around.
Thanks, Mayor Body. Through you, question for Kate. There was one particular big item that we had to deal with last December. We had a recommendation at Corporate Services to allocate funds from the 18 surplus to what was necessarily going into the wastewater deficit that had been created by waiving the DCs. I think it was like $625,000 at the time, and we moved to 50 or something, but we still have an unfunded debt there, correct?
Through your worship, the decision was made to not fund the reserve at year end and ultimately from the surplus. However, to capture that deficit in the study that we just underwent. Hempson did look at that, and they determined that it was a wash between the decision to not use any of those DCs to fund any capital projects, balanced out the lost revenue, and therefore it was sort of an in and an out. So we're sort of starting from scratch. We can't go back and utilize any DCs for those projects that have already taken place. However, the new capital program anticipates using development charges as if we're collecting them at the fully calculated rates.
Okay, thank you. I have, I guess my thoughts are, as I look through here, and option number 1, option number 2, I see about $142,000 a year. Option number 3 is $400,000 a year. Option number 5, do not impose, is 4.5. 5 years ago, I thought when I ran, I walked around the community, and I still firmly believe that this community can grow to 25,000 people, and we need not hire a police officer, firefighter, build a library, ball diamond, arena. We need people, we need growth, we need residents to offset the tax load. We have, what's very apparent to us is a significant labor shortage in front of us at the time, getting some of these projects off the ground, and it's unfortunate. They seem to be just, many people seem to be in Saugeen Shores to the west of us, but we're struggling to get a lot of that growth that we've got now on the books. We've got it approved. It's there waiting. I've just got some numbers jotted down, and these are just approximate, but what's our average assessment? I think from 4 years ago, it's going to be updated, but it's about $215,000 a house. Per house, that's about $2,500 a year in municipal taxes that we can generate. So just to get $100,000, that requires approximately 40 new homes a year to be built just to offset a $100,000 increase in new operational budget allotment, right? So, we're going up at 900,000 or $1 million or 1.1 a year. I realize that there's some streets, I think there's a value in a DC. 16th Street East, we've got major work in front of us next year. 16th Avenue East, as more people are using these streets, you can see the breakdown. But there's other projects that I think outside of growth, they'd have to be done anyway. And 10th Street Bridge is one of those. Whether there's 4,000 in the community or 40,000, you have to redo the bridge. So I'm very much aligned with Councillor Thomas thinking it's high. I guess my preference right now is to maintain the existing DC rates. There is contributions maintained there. In particular, it hits apartments at a charge of $1,776 from 21 going forward after 2020, where it's $3,629. So we're trying to tackle some of that affordability issue with that application. So I guess personally, that's where I'm at. It is a charge, and it's something I can defend and live with in the community. And I think it still recognizes that a lot of our spending would be spent regardless if there's growth anyway. So
Good, thank you. Carol?
Through you, Your Worship, we've had numerous discussions around DC rates, and it is very, very complex. We did determine on October the 28th the direction that we wished. I certainly support that direction of implementing maximum DCs, recognizing there are anticipated changes in funding potentially coming, not necessarily up. So I think at this point in time, we need to use the existing DCs to help support the taxpayer and also to facilitate existing growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dodd?
Thank you, Your Worship. We received a report a couple meetings ago from the city manager. It showed what we had received, 246 new home builds in 4.5 years, something like that. And that was comparative to 247 that was done in, the previous 7. So we do understand, I think we do recognize that the waiving of DCs did help growth. I think it did help get that movement when we started doing the extension of the hardline services to the Sydenham Heights region. We took a big step to ensure that there was growth available in that area. Those were now serviceable lots to that area. So when when councils passed, I'll step back 5 years, when we did this in 2014, I believe the council's mindset at the time was we needed to show community, needed to show developers, we needed to show the public that we were here for growth, and growth was what was needed. And clearly by those numbers back in the day, growth was needed, and we needed to change the mindset for our developers. When we see what are on the books currently, the Braemont, the Red Hawk, you see the new developments that are going on, the Sydenham, the old Strathcona School. We're seeing constant growth and constant tire kicking all the time for pieces of land, and that site plans are going through. There are 700 new homes potentially. The one thing I think we failed at when the last time we did this report, which when I talk to people, the one thing I can never say that I feel bad about is we didn't collect enough for wastewater services. That's a situation that we have left ourselves open for the taxpayer to compensate for new home development. You can say that new roads don't need to be applied for an infill lot. Once someone hooks into the plumbing and starts flushing the toilet and running their taps, that ultimately affects all the other water and wastewater users. So I felt that was one opportunity that we had missed on in the past. One thing that I would strongly support, that we would fully support the wastewater and water services aspect of it. When we had developers here last meeting, there was a common word that kept being reiterated, and it was affordability. And I know in our past community improvement plans, we've had wording within there to describe about, was it Pam, Director of Community Services, in our community, CIP, we do have something worded in there about providing assistance or helping with something for developers who are doing affordable housing. Do we not?
Through your worship, in the current community improvement plan, there is an affordable housing loan program. It's never been used, but other initiatives, and Anne Marie maybe touched on some of them tonight, through the city and county CIP, the vacant land, as well as the brownfield, encourage certainly redevelopment.
And that's the one part I think is really interesting, is that we've had that CIP for years, and we have never had a developer use it. So when we think about what do we need in this community, what we do need growth. What's the next thing we do? We know in Grey County there's 800 people on a waiting list to get affordable housing. So what can we do, just like what the county had done, was to look at solutions on how to lower that DC for apartments and multi-units. Because obviously there's a need for that within our community. And if we can assist in that way to help individuals who need that kind of housing, I think that's one thing that's really important as well. The Director of Corporate Services, I bugged you about this in the past. If we don't apply indoor recreation, what would be the burden back on the taxpayer for repaying for the rec center? I apologize, I should have let you know before.
I believe it's $2.5 million.
So this is an asset, thank you. So this is an asset that we put in knowing that it totally was probably larger than what our community of 20,000 people needed, with the expectation that that facility was going to be there for future generations, future development, more access to people that are going to utilize that service. I think that is a growth-related service that we should be collecting for. All that in said, I could go off on roads and resurfacing. That's seems to be my forte now. If we do not collect on that, on roads for these new developments or new extensions or any growth-related aspects of the current road resurfacing, who's paying for it? Our current ratepayers are going to pay for it in the capital budget. So once again, that's one thing, an aspect I do see as an important need. Do I think $12,000 is high? I do. I do. I think that still is going to be a troublesome for some individuals. Now, if you're buying $700,000, is $20,000 make or break whether you build a house or not? I don't know. But if you are doing an apartment complex or a multi-res and that $20,000 is there, does that affect you to do an apartment or multi-complex? Maybe. The amount of money that you're going to bring in, your revenues brought back in from those, obviously is going to have to be higher if there's a $20,000 charge associated with it. If our aim is to try to meet our affordability targets in our community, which is a desperate need that we all heard in the last election, maybe we need to start giving a break for apartments and multi-units. But those are my thoughts.
Deputy Mayor O'Leary?
I'll be quick. I would agree with Travis on I believe that the waiving the DC charges definitely worked. I think our number has to be higher than it was before. I'm thinking like $8,000, but there's a lot that I like in number 4, and if we implement that, maybe a little higher, but definitely under 10. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Councillor Tamming?
I want to commend, first of all, council and your worship for taking, or having the guts, rather, to do this 5 years ago. It could not have been easy, and I think you knew that some of the ratepayers would not have been happy with that. As we've heard, I won't repeat it, rather, it helped. It boosted the builds in town tremendously. I'm going to personally support the direction we're giving staff. And I'd like to begin, I guess, with the 12,000. I know it's a big number. I also know, and Kate can tell us that, perhaps now or later, that actually that still puts us near close to the bottom quarter, I believe, of Grey County, and in the lower region of Ontario generally for DCs. This is not a staggering number. I mentioned it, I happen to bump into a lot of people that move up here from Toronto and the GTA, Kitchener, Waterloo. They do not find this an oppressive number. I specifically have mentioned them, so that's just anecdotal. I'm going to support it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I could not find any municipality of stature that continues to give repeated waivers of DCs just across the board. And they do it typically to encourage affordable housing. It's a great project, and I'm sure our city council will be open to that in the future, among other exemptions. But as a rule, it's just not done, and I don't think we should remain to be the exception. The other thing is, and I mentioned this to a few builders, I said, look, we have almost zero unemployment, the economy's on fire, we build hundreds of houses in this city, thanks to you. If we don't start waiving, or if we don't start lifting the waiver now, under what possible financial circumstances in the future will it be time, in your view, to lift the waiver? And although I didn't get the answer never, I just got a sense the answer was never. And so if not us, who? If not now, when? And I'll leave my Churchillian rhetoric for another day. But I support this. I think it's a great idea. And obviously we're all nervous. We're all nervous that the number of builds might go down in response to this, but you can only ask so much of the ratepayer in terms of covering essentially new houses.
Go ahead, Marion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly echo the comments of Councillor Dodd, and I don't want to repeat all of that, and I won't belabor everyone by listening to it again. I'm not in favor of the fully calculated rates. I appreciate that the bills have happened when we've given the holiday. However, we need to play catch-up now. So with that in mind, we do need to have something in place. I am in favor, though, of the allowing development charges exemption for purpose-built rental housings. And that, I believe, has been written into the bylaw. So with that in mind, I think I'll just leave it, Your Worship, that I am in favor of a reduced rate.
Go ahead, Councillor Hanley.
It's an incredibly difficult topic to talk about in 2 minutes.
You can take 2.5.
2.5? Okay, thank you. I think that my position on this has changed. I had come into council with knowledge of development charges in other jurisdictions and just how oppressive they are. They're incredibly high in other areas of the province, and they really do affect the cost of housing. But here in Owen Sound, as Councillor Tamming has mentioned, realistically, housing values are incredibly respectable when you consider the rest of the province. And I think that waiving the development charges 4 years ago was an incredibly bold thing to do, and I applaud each and every person up here who made that decision. It worked, but I think now is time to get back on the horse. I think development is here. I think it's not going away. And with that, I'm going to move the recommendation as is, Your Worship.
Just going to get you to hold the move until there may be some other discussion just first. So I think can I go first?
I just want to comment, follow up on something Councillor Tamming mentioned about the waiving of DCs, and I just want to observe that our nearest neighbor actually has no development charges. Taxes are lower, there are no development charges in Georgian Bluffs. Owen Sound has to remain competitive. And at the old development charge of, what was it, 35, even before the 7,000 recommendation, we were not competitive. So I would just say that, I'm ready to make a motion too. But I think that, it's time to bring development charges back, but I'm just very mindful of the fact that our nearest competitor for new housing in the entire region has no charges at all. Now, there are no services either, but, it is a fine balance.
They don't need services. We provide them. Kate, two questions. What's the approximate value of the assets of the city of Owen Sound? Wayne walked out. I know he could give it to me.
I think when we did our asset management plan back in 2013, we were looking at something like $300 million just for the core assets.
And we've got approximately 11,500 taxpayers. So, yep. Okay, so if we divide that and think about the assets owned by the city of Owen Sound, each taxpayer, each household currently owns about $26,000 of assets.
Mm-hmm.
So are we asking too much to ask a new resident to buy into to buy a share in the corporation? or are we just going to give it for free? That's maybe one different way to look at it. We said we needed growth, but we needed growth to try and add taxes to help spread the cost of providing the services that we provide over more taxpayers and try and bring the cost per household down. So if we are waiving development charges just to put it on to taxpayers that are already there, so in other words, there's a sense almost that the taxpayers that already own $26,000 worth of assets per household or per property are going to be paying more to bring in new people. Are we just breaking even on growth, and are we really moving further ahead? Yes, Georgian Bluffs doesn't have any, but Meaford's are still higher than anything that's recommended here. Saugeen Shores is higher. They seem to be growing. Town of Blue Mountains has areas that are over $40,000, and that doesn't seem to be hurting them. I hear from one developer who does developments all over the province, does not live here, and he thinks we're crazy that we're not collecting development charges, because when he goes to do something in Owen Sound, he has to pay for the road with a promise that we'll try and collect from other people that are going to use it going forward and try and reimburse you down the road. Municipalities that he likes to deal with, DCs are already there. They build those roads. They're there for him, that help him develop, so it isn't coming out of his pocket sort of as he's moving forward. So he thinks we should be collecting them. I think we need to put them back in. I don't think that we can continue forever not collecting development charges. I think whatever amount we set them at, we need to go with that. We can't be we got to stick to our guns when people walk in and stand in front of us and glare us down and say that they want a discount or an extension of time, or, we did it to try and to spur growth, and I think it worked. If we don't have DCs forever, then it loses that impact, because you want them to develop now, you want them to build now, you want them to get going, and if we're waiving DCs forever, then we've lost that advantage. So those are my thoughts. One of you guys wants to make a motion, you can fight it out. Oh, I think Brianna's hand went up first. Go ahead.
I suspect I'm going to get my butt kicked, but I will move the recommendation as it is.
Help us out and kind of read us through that, if you would.
That in consideration of staff report CR 19140, respecting the development charges bylaw, City Council directs staff to bring forward a bylaw to levy development charges as it is presented.
It's presented. Yeah, can you help me?
Yeah, for council's reference, I'll just, the bylaw presented includes the development charges at the fully calculated rates with the reduced services, so approximately $11,000 plus, just under $12,000 per unit. It also incorporates the exemption, or discretionary exemption, I should add, for the purpose-built rental.
Okay, so just hold on. So Brock's motion is on the floor, but I've got a funny feeling that there's going to be some suggestions of amendments on certain things. So let's wait and maybe hear before we vote on that. Go ahead.
I mean, I would just draw everybody's attention to the fact that this is only until 2021, right? And then we're talking about a completely different set of
provincial rules.
Exactly. So this is only for a year.
Okay, Trav.
Thank you, Your Worship. To the Director of Corporate Services, could you give a definition for people who are watching of what you meant by your purpose-built?
It is a multi-unit development that is for the purpose of long-term rental as opposed to a home ownership or condominium type development.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just have a follow-up on the same question. You used the word discretionary, but my reading of what we're going to pass here was that we were actually going to just do a blanket So not every development was going to come back to us applying for the exemption, that it was going to be for rental units across the board.
When I say discretionary, I mean discretionary is that it's not included within the Act. So the Development Charges Act includes some compulsory exemptions. This would be a discretionary exemption. It would be applied evenly to any of those, but it's sort of in addition to what the Act defines as an exemption.
That's the end of my questions. I have a comment.
Yeah, keep going. I think I know where
Thanks.
you're going. So.
I'm not going to support the motion. I think that I like all of it except the amount coming in. I think after a 5-year holiday, and given my earlier comments about the lack of any kind of a DC charge in Georgian Bluffs where the taxes are also lower, I just think we're going to put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage leaping to $12,000 immediately. I would take issue with the 1-year comment because, in fact, in a year we'll be expected to pass our CBC and continue on the Julie Marie component of this. So really there'll be virtually no change in a year unless we decide to do away with that, which I wouldn't, because at the rate we're going, it'll take us the next 50 years to pay off the rec center, and I don't think we want to hang on to it that long. In terms of the payments, that is. We do want to hang on to the rec center.
Just for clarity, Wayne, how many years to pay it off? Not really 50. The rec center.
I'll defer to Kate.
I believe currently there's approximately 25 years left to pay.
Yeah, just... you scared me at 50.
But it'll come down a lot quicker, Your Worship, if we keep that under a recreation
agreed.
charge in
Agreed.
there. So I would say it's not changing in a year.
Yeah, agreed. Go ahead.
Is there a friendly amendment there, or is it a flat no?
I'd be happy to make a friendly amendment to bring the charge in at a cap of $8,000 and let staff sort out how they're going to deal with that.
Hold on, I was expecting something on apartments. Was where I thought you were...
Yeah, no, I'm supporting the exemption for the apartments,
Okay,
which
so
is
that's-
as it is. I just had that question of clarification.
I'm out to lunch here. Okay, Brian.
I support the amendment. I won't be voting for anything in double digits, and you just happen to hit my number. As I said before, I'm good with $8,000.
Okay, so maybe what I'll do then is call the question, which is Brock's motion, is the recommendation. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. I just had one quick question. Is there a 10-year commitment on a purchase or sell on part of that asset being the rec center? And is there any assumptions made in this report on that? That was dated before I came here, and I've heard some discussion on
the Y
that.
has an option to purchase their part, but I don't believe that would affect this calculation.
Okay, so now I'm going to call Councillor Hamley's question or motion, which is moving as recommended. So all in favor? 1, 2, 3. And opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So somebody vote twice?
No.
No? Okay. I had 3 in favor. That still adds up to 8. So that's defeated. Next motion, Richard.
I'd move that we accept the report as presented with the addition of an $8,000 cap on development charges.
Okay, discussion on that? Do we need to? You voting or discussing?
I don't know. I'm caught in the no man's land. To the Director of Corporate Services, if that goes through at $8,000 for, how would you just drop every section by 20%? Yeah, okay. And just so we're clear, this is going to include indoor rec, wastewater, roads, and what's the other components? Okay.
Go ahead, Carol.
So further to that motion, the amendment, would we need to revisit the capital budget that we've looked at on a preliminary basis? Would the changes be necessary?
No, this would just mean that we're collecting a percentage less for each of those projects than was anticipated in the study using the fully calculated rates.
So if we're collecting less, what makes up the difference?
when we undertake the program, or when we undertake the project, we'll have to fund that difference through the levy or the water rates or wastewater rates, depending on where the funds are coming from.
Okay, so I'm going to call that question. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opposed. It was 3, so that carries. Man, oh man, that went a lot easier than 5 years ago, except for me. Next, 12B in our agenda is our fire chief reporting on the appointment of a fire prevention inspector.
Thank you, Your Worship. In April of 2015, City Council passed a appointed officers bylaw. And so we're here tonight with the resignation of Matthew Bonin, who was our fire prevention inspector. We have hired a Doug McEwen as our new fire prevention inspector. And the appointed officers bylaw needs to be amended to add Doug to that. So what I'm here tonight is to ask council to direct staff to change this bylaw to take Matthew Bonin out and move Doug McEwen in as a fire prevention inspector and parking enforcement officer.
Thank you. Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Chief, for coming to do the presentation, and I'll move that recommendation.
Just have one question. Why a parking enforcement officer?
Through your worship, if someone parks in the fire route, they have the authority then to ticket for that.
Of course. Perfect. Thanks. Anyone else have any comments? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks, Doug. Oral report. Deputy Mayor O'Leary from
Thank you, Worship.
Grey County.
County Council has changed direction somewhat with long-term care. Council is now applying for 62 beds rather than 96. There will now be a 128-bed new build at Grey Gables, which would see an application for 62 new beds with the current 66 beds at Grey Gables incorporated into the new building. The existing Grey Gables building would then be available to be put to a different use. The Grey County budget will be presented at the Committee of the Whole meeting on February 7th, 2020. That said, we did get a peek at the budget based on the most current information, and the estimated tax levy increase will be 1.46%. Warden Hex was presented with his pin to end his first-year term as warden. The vote for the new warden will be tomorrow night at the inauguration. Someone Hex is running again, along with the Mayor of Grey Highlands, Paul McQueen. Thank you, Worship.
Any questions for Deputy Mayor O'Leary? Seeing none. Consent agenda, number 13.
Through your worship, on the consent agenda this evening is minutes for receipt from the Owen Sound Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation, Owen Sound Housing Company, and the Owen Sound Community Fund. The annual raffle application from the Sydenham Sportsmen Association is listed for receipt, and several businesses received their license, including the Christmas Trade Show at the Bayshore, Eternal Bee at 791 First Ave East, Touchzilla Computer Services at 828 Third Ave East, Fabulous Hair Extension and Beauty Supply at 154 10th Street East, Unit 1, All Things Tea relocated to 810 10th Street West, Unit 4, and Come On Let's Play at 2045 20th Avenue East, Units 18 to 19. And lastly, there's the council information package. A full listing is available at 13G.
Great, thank you. Councillor Kepke?
Actually, that's me, Your Worship.
Oh, okay.
Very short meeting.
No, I have to do
Oh, I'm
this.
sorry.
Thank you. Moved by myself that City Council receives items 13A to 13I on the consent agenda dated December 2nd, 2019.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried.
Deputy
Mayor O'Leary.
I'm really not in a hurry. This was a very short meeting. The board approved the spending of $78 plus HST for a veteran sponsorship in the Sun-Times annual Remembrance Day feature, and also a $50 donation to the Legion for commemorative wreath at the annual Remembrance Day ceremony. And we had a verbal report from Chair Parsons regarding a holiday delivery service. We had a discussion regarding the process related to road closures in Owen Sound and Clarence of the road closure communications and the road closure. Thank you, Your Worship.
Just making sure, was that the DIA report? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just a question to Councillor or Deputy Mayor O'Leary. One of my passions is about improving the downtown core, and I know it's shared obviously by the DIA. Can you give us any update? I understand we provided them with some funds, and they were going to self-fund some of it themselves to hire a consultant. Can you tell us where that's at for branding and so forth?
Yeah, okay.
Through your worship, there was an RFP issued. There was a team, both of DIA members and city staff, that evaluated the proposals. The RFP was awarded to BC Hughes. There's a startup meeting planned, but the downtown merchants advised us that December's not the best month for them. So we're doing some background work, but there'll be a kickoff meeting in January.
Thank you. I just wanted the public to be aware of that, Ms. Coulter. Thank you.
Councillor Merton, anything to report from housing?
Nothing regarding housing, other than we're continuing to work on plans for potential future development, but we're still in process. And I'm also on the Community Foundation.
Just in housing, you did get provincial funding to go ahead recently?
Has not been announced.
It has not been shut up? Not
Yeah,
well, the microphone's on.
you.
Good, thank you.
And moving forward to the community, Owen Sound Community Fund, nothing additional to add to that. We're continuing to work on defining the role of the fund and the foundation for Owen Sound. So unless there's any questions.
Seeing none, thank you. I think that covers it, right? Good. So we're down to committee reports, 14A, Accessibility Advisory Committee. Somebody on it? Oh, you're at it, okay.
Yes. So, on December the 2nd, through your mayor body, at the meeting of the Accessibility Advisory Committee of November the 25th, a report from the Owen Sound Police Service Director of Civilian Services regarding the duties of municipalities around accessible taxi cabs was reviewed. Suggestions were provided by the committee. A follow-up report will come back to the committee for consideration. The site plan review regarding Southbridge Long-Term Care Facility was presented. Correspondence was received with a request that a report return from staff to the Accessibility Committee regarding accessibility at the Julie MacArthur Regional Recreation Center. I move that these minutes of the Accessibility Advisory Committee be received and the recommendations contained therein be approved.
Good, thank you. Questions? Seeing none, call the question to approve those. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. 14B, Community Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a quick report from the Senior Manager of Property and Parks and Open Spaces regarding the Harrison Park Inn lease agreement and the capital project partnership update. For those who are unaware, the leasee is contributing 50% of the total capital cost for the renovation for the new washroom at the Harrison Park Inn, which will have full accessibility and will be able to have both from the restaurant and the interior access, as well as general park users from the exterior side of the building as well. The lease agreement for this extension will go from January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2030. Also included in that, we should advise that the lessee is also not only just paying their rent, but they also pay property taxes, garbage and disposal fees. They're responsible for utility costs, and they're responsible for maintaining the washrooms of the building. Next, we discussed the Farmers Market Public Washroom. This will be some good news for users within the downtown core. That committee is recommending that the public washroom reopen, and that it be have a program with the magnetic timers like we have in other facilities, so it'll automatically lock at a certain time with the magnetic lock, and it'll be open for 7 days a week, and that staff will continue to monitor the usage and activity of that washroom. We received a report regarding the wrap-up for power skating, hockey skills, soccer camp, and swimming. These are actually quite exciting news actually to see this. The participation numbers from the Harrison Park pool increased from 4,900 about in 2018 to over 10,000 in 2019. So this was mostly attributed to the new improvements to the pool in 2018, as well as making it more accessible washrooms, everything else that was associated with that. So I think that's a really good story that we saw literally the numbers double. So that's a great one from all that discussion we had back in the past regarding the Harrison Park pool. Soccer camp, the city share from the camp has increased from 3 to 5% for the registration fees. That's good news. So it was a net profit position. And in power skating overall, between the two, power skating and hockey, we're in a minor deficit of 568, yet those camps pay full ice rentals, but the registrations were up for 2018. So overall, everything was on par there, which is great, including doubled the numbers at Harrison Park Pool. We just had a report regarding the 2020 Arts and Cultural Awards. As you're aware, these are going to be coming up again. This was changed to be biannually. Now, it used to previously be annual, now it's biannual. So there's going to be another report coming to Community Services in December to appoint 6 jury members based on the applications received through the public call for members. Finally, we received a report regarding the summer events wrap-up. This is was presented by the Manager of Community Development and Marketing, and this was just regarding all of the city's events throughout the year. I can advise that staff were approximately $20,000 under the budget combined between all the events. That'd be Canada Day, Harbor Nights, all those big ones of the summer events that we do throughout the summer, and staff were under budget by $20,000. So that obviously is contributed to both funds that were received from donations or that we received from sponsorships through our partners, and we'd like to thank all of those individuals who do help contribute their money towards those events as well as the taxpayers. And with that, Your Worship, I would move the recommendation of those minutes.
Approval?
Yes.
Good. Questions? Somebody wants to vote in a hurry. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next is minutes from operations, November 12th.
Thanks, Mayor Body. The November operations meeting also had a captive audience, a little bit like tonight, but not quite as big. Particularly for Report 9C, which, as you can see in the minutes, we moved up to post-question period. Committee had an excellent round-the-table discussion of the information in the report provided regarding the ban or proposed ban on single-use plastics. Some public members recalled being a part of the pesticide ban issue, and this reminded them very much of that from several years ago. It also exemplified an example, or it exemplified where the province took the lead finally and implemented the restrictions at the time, thereby kind of negating the work the city had undertaken to that point. There was some discussion of a strengthened environmental pillar in the forthcoming 2020 strategic plan update, and potentially what input a task force or informed working group could generate from a few different committee members. And there was consensus about a patchwork of ideas on the ground level at this time from various municipalities. And the committee was very supportive of a federal and provincial government who will respond to this issue and provide that uniform framework sooner than later. So committee was unanimous in the motion to receive the report and not implement a single-use plastic ban due to pending direction from the federal government this time. Committee also received for information a presentation of the 2020 departmental budget by Mr. Kafalis. As well, we received for information the monthly airport update. We had a report referring to school crossing enhancements at 10th Street and 6th Avenue West. Councillor Merton, you'll know this very well, just down the street from you. A very dangerous, exceptionally dangerous crossing at the top or at the brow of 10th Street West Hill. It's got a history, and budget funds were allocated in the 2018 budget to make improvements at various pedestrian and school crossing improvements in the city where engineering saw fit. This crossing is one of those, and it would see the installation of a new solar-powered flashing light program to activate on school days when crossing guards are present. Flashing signals will also indicate a speed reduction to 40 kilometers an hour when flashing. The report and the recommendation contained is to amend the traffic bylaw to reduce the speed to 40 kilometers an hour when the school crossing signals are flashing at that location. Committee also received for information a report on the transition of hazardous or special waste to individual producer responsibility. How the transition will impact us continues to be unknown, but some cost implications are expected to maybe be more known in December. And a bylaw amendment to allow one accessible parking space on 3rd Avenue East, just south of 8th Street. This will assist some of the businesses on the south side of 8th Street with enhancing the customer accessibility due to the detour route. So with that, I would move approval of the minutes and the recommendations contained therein.
Thank you, Councillor Gregg. I just want to add something that wasn't available, I don't think, well, wouldn't have been available at that meeting with regard to single-use plastics. We received a notice from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario on dated November 20th, announcing that the provincial government was starting with a webinar, their first consultation, Wednesday, November 27th, so last week, and I haven't heard anything since then, as they develop a new regulation in the blue box under the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act 2016. Welcome news to municipalities, as this process will define how producer-run blue box system will work and determine the regulatory amendments necessary to end municipalities' obligation to provide blue box services between 2023 and 2025. So waste diversion, where was this? Include a convenient and accessible collection system identifying standardized list of materials to be collected, including considering how best to deal with single-use plastics. So the province is moving ahead. They're starting to consult, and with this, I think, was just with municipalities last Wednesday, but it was basically, from what I understand, announcing how they were going to be consulting, but they're writing policies, as we state, for across the whole province. When I did go into the provincial website, they're talking about, I didn't have time to read it very clearly, but they're talking about how they're going to deal with the federal government moving ahead and how they want to work together to remove single-use plastics and improve recycling and try and increase getting garbage going out of landfills. So that came out after your meeting. Anything further to that? Any questions? So I will call the question. Scott's moved to receive and approve the minutes. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We have no postponed matters. Councillor Thomas, you have given notice previously.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll keep my remarks about it very short. I just wanted to clarify, because I've certainly heard lots of commentary since I brought the notice of motion, some of it good. I am not opposed to adding additional long-term beds in Grey County. That's not what my motion is about. I think that, one of my key jobs as a city councillor is to look out for the taxpayers of Owen Sound. And I agree that while I'm at the county, I am also looking after the taxpayers of Grey County. And it's my belief that the plan to expand Grey Gables is not a good plan for the taxpayers of Grey County. Long-term care costs went up 43% over a 10-year period. It's expected that by 2027, the cost of long-term care in Grey County, if they maintain the status quo, will be $39 million a year. And the taxpayers of Owen Sound will be on the hook for a significant amount of that cost. That's if they maintain the status quo. But the plan here is to double the size of Grey Gables, a home that is losing money hand over fist and cannot be staffed properly. In 2016, they did a survey of staff who admitted that they could not adequately care for the needs of some of their residents because they were so stretched thin. So my motion is pretty straightforward, and I'll just read it, that the mayor send a letter to MPP Bill Walker expressing the City of Owen Sound's opposition to the plan to add additional beds to the Grey Gables long-term care facility in Markdale. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion. Councillor Gregg?
Well, I have to discuss a little on it. I recall two to 3 years ago at the Bay Shore, I had a question on selling Lee Manor versus Grey Gables, and the answer was it was in a closed session, so there's some information, rightfully so, that I wouldn't be purview to. So recognizing that, and it's a very lengthy issue with lots of background, I don't think this council could rightfully have all the information to make a decision like they're making at the county here. It's not the scope of the city council to advise direction to county council. I do thank Councillor Thomas and Deputy Mayor O'Leary for your passionate approach to protecting the taxpayer, and I look forward to seeing more of it next week when we're at budget. Resolution 8719 was to request 96 more beds at the county. Resolution 8819 asking for a deferral and coming back for more information was defeated. Numbers were provided. They came forward at the next council meeting, which Councillor Thomas attended. Your comments tonight are very good, but during the council meeting, you didn't speak during the debate on the issue. And with the comments brought forth from the Deputy Mayor O'Leary over the last two meetings prior to tonight, and the subsequent motion from Councillor Thomas, I would like to inform Council of the updated Grey County Code of Conduct, which Rule 15 states members of Council will not actively undermine the implementation of Council's decisions, and the commentary is, the role of elected officials once a Council decision is made is to support the implementation of that decision, not to work against its implementation publicly or behind the scenes. Council decisions are arrived at following discussion and debate, reflecting the democratic process. Members are expected to engage in debate with their fellow council members through the democratic process of government. However, once council has made its decision, members must recognize that decision as the duly considered decision of the body of council. As members of that body of council, individual members, those who did not agree with the decision, are not to engage in activities that seek to challenge or undermine that decision. Members can express disagreement with council's decisions, but it is contrary to the ethical behavior of members of council to actively seek to undermine, challenge, or work against council's decisions. That revised code of conduct was moved by Councillor O'Leary at the county. So I see the motion on the floor in front of us as a violation to the current county code of conduct, and I would politely and respectfully ask Councillor Thomas to withdraw the motion on the floor, or through direction from the chair to withdraw that motion.
If I may, I just want to respond to that code of conduct thing. We are double hatters, that we vote here and we vote there, and I remember in the past, Councillor Deputy Mayor Wright actually voting differently at two different places, voting in the best interest. Councillor Gregg, you will remember that the original plan was to close Grey Gables and move it. However, other municipalities put together money and hired somebody to undermine that decision. And, you know, I think, be careful how far I go with this. They maybe undermined a lot of things. They worked very hard after a decision was made to undermine it. I think if I got that motion very clear from Councillor Thomas, he was not talking about sending a message to Upper County Council. He was talking about sending a letter to our MPP. So we'll move on. Who else wants to talk? Go ahead.
Your Worship and Madam Clerk, in view of that code of conduct, which I had not read to that detail before, do we not have a serious point of order with respect to the are we entertaining a motion that is in clear contravention of a code of conduct? Because I have real problems right now.
No.
We're not.
No, we have our own code of conduct, but at City of Owen Sound, we're a city council. At Grey County, we're a Grey County council.
Just seems to be we're complicit.
Other comments? Councillor Hamley.
It's kind of sad that this debate has kind of devolved down to this. The reality in the province of Ontario is that we need more long-term care beds. There are not enough now as it is, and we have an aging population that's only going to make this problem worse. Now, I understand that there are all kinds of costs and issues with this particular plan by the county, but I don't believe that haranguing another level of government about a decision that they're not even really involved at this point solves the problems. And so I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Yes, there is need for beds, and Grey County has received 197 beds since the county started to talk about getting 94. 28 of those are at Rockwood Terrace. The rest are all going to private, where it will not be at any cost to the taxpayer. Councillor Tammy.
Thank you, Your Worship. You'll notice my previous comment dealt with the point of order. I'd just like to speak to the merits of it.
Go ahead.
First of all, I wonder if we know, if the additional beds go into Markdale, do we know what effect that would have on the annual taxes of an Owen Sound resident? Do we know that? We don't? I suspect we don't.
But by memory, the cost per bed to build the facility is $188,000 per bed, and I think the cost to operate is somewhere in the neighborhood of $18,000 per bed per year.
18
18
And then
is the average, yeah.
My second comment is I'm sympathetic to the points being made, but I don't understand what's meant in reference to seniors that you're losing money hand over fist. I didn't know you made money on seniors. It seems to me that there's a strong argument to be made that the farmers, the shopkeepers, the husbands and wives, and the grandparents and great-grandparents have an entitlement to be housed in a home closest to their place of community. And I think it should take a lot to get us to dissuade Mr. Walker from going in that direction.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Carol.
At this point in time, my understanding from the application is it really is asking. It's a request for information and consideration. So it's a consideration followed by a commitment which involves the operational details. If we look at per capita the age of people in our area, we know that there are older people. We certainly are high in that area. If we also look at this as the need for any organization to have a critical mass, to have operational efficiencies, until you get over that threshold, it is a struggle to be efficient. The other advantage to our community would be the opportunity for strategic partnerships, for linking with educational programs to supply the caregivers, the PSWs, the nurses, the support services that we already know are in short demand. By creating opportunity, we actually potentially could have a spin-off benefit to our community that isn't necessarily just a tax drain. So by going forward, by making a request, we are opening the door for consideration and opportunities that may or may not be operationalized into fact, but it makes sense to consider possibilities rather than close the door to future opportunities. So I will not be supporting the motion.
Just to add a little bit of, I probably shouldn't be talking so much, but just to add a little bit of background, the Lynn has provided money to Georgian College to give startup tuition money for one of the nursing programs. PSWs, so which is good, and it's here. Good. Okay, further discussion? Councillor Dodd.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question, and maybe it's because I don't sit at county. I read enough at City of Owen Sound, so I don't read these reports. With the additional request for these additional beds, if the county receives them, there's a number of beds that can be provided, correct? In the province?
Yeah.
So if there's a number of beds that can be provided, and the number of beds are provided to the County of Grey to do their long-term care, does that obviously, if you said yes, then that would obviously reduce the amount of beds that can be provided for another facility within our region, a private enterprise. If you're taking beds into moving them to the county, obviously you're obviously not going to have enough beds to provide to additional private sector.
That's an argument.
So
that's an argument.
I don't know, and if that's the case, I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know. I didn't run for deputy mayor or mayor, so I hope you guys are doing your job. My thing is, I don't know what is the best way. I haven't seen the reports, whatever. I know the costing is the costing, and costing's high, but we do know private institutions can provide sometimes a more specific service at lower amount. And I guess that's where I don't know. I think it's great, like as other members have stated, if we do get beds. I just don't know, is it better for it to be from the county or is it better to be private? To be honest, in the end, everyone had the same goal. Yes, it's great that in the end that we have enough beds for our region to supply the seniors that are here in our region, but does it make more sense to be, done through a private sector, or does it make more sense to have a public sector? And that's where my confusion is, or where just my...
So the transfer from the province per bed is the same to publicly run as it is to privately run. The cost of which the operator can charge the person in the bed is the same in private as is public. So those things are set, but the private does it at profit, and the public enhances services or whatever that it's costing $18,000 approximately per bed. Councillor, Deputy Mayor O'Leary.
I just want to make the point that, the county only has to have one long-term care home. It's losing $18,000 for every bed they have on average over the 3 homes that they have, and we're expanding on that. All of the private homes surrounding us and all the smaller municipalities are all making money. The government is going to give out the beds. My point is, I don't know why they can't go to the private ones. Why do we have to expand so we can lose double our money, because that's where we're heading, and let someone else have the beds. The beds are still going to be there. We're not arguing that we're not saying we don't need beds. It's just that we can't operate long-term care homes efficiently. And we're making it work, and we can't staff them, and we're making it worse by expanding. So maybe Mayor Body, you can explain, what happens, we're asking for 62 beds, what if they give us 10? Because that could happen too. What happens to that bill then?
No idea.
Right. So that's, when we were at 96 beds, and that's the confusion. Like, no one is doing any homework. No one is looking at the math. No one cares about the costs. They're just going like this. We'll get it later. So at 96 beds, they were saying, well, probably won't get the 96 anyways. So let's wait and see what we're going to get. This is the kind of conversation we had. Now it's 62. I don't know, what happens if we get 10? What do we do with Grey Gables with 10 new beds?
Go ahead, Marion.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Councillor Thomas. From what I understand is you're not opposed to Grey County having additional beds. It's just additional beds at Grey Gables. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so there's not a cost, if I understand what you're saying, there's not an additional cost as big for additional beds to be put in private nursing homes or retirement homes, as opposed to Grey Gables, which is subsidized, or Lee Manor, which is subsidized, etc. Is that correct?
Correct.
It's so much more complicated than this, because the provincial government wants B and C quality homes upgraded to A, and it has to be done by 2025. And there's subsidies to homes that are being built to get them to A. Therefore, Rockwood Terrace in Durham gets the funding to help build it. Grey Gables is an A because of the width of the doors and things. And it won't get the grants, which means the province has to pay for the entire, or the county has to pay for the entire bill. So it just gets more complicated. Go ahead.
So the retirement facility that is proposed to be built across from Seasons, that's a long-term care?
Long-term care, we got to clarify from retirement
Okay,
and
so
assisted
long-term
living.
care.
Long-term care.
That is a private facility?
It will be private, yes.
And do they already have approval for beds, or are they,
they got,
part of this request?
They got 90-something new beds. Maybe it was just 90 right on. I can't remember.
So it's already an approval for Grey County?
Yeah, there's been 97 new beds approved for Grey County.
Okay, thanks.
Others? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Oh, wait a minute. Okay. All in favor? 1, 2, 3. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's defeated. So a discussion of additional business. I don't think anyone put their hand up, or did they? I did. Councillor Gregg did, and Brianna did. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor Body. This Wednesday marks, or it not doesn't mark, I mean, Friday's a tragic day to mark in history. But Wednesday, December 4th, the Canadian Blood Services is back in Owen Sound, and they make have over 13,000 donation events per year. The needs for blood from donors is great and ongoing, and 50% of Canadians will need or know someone that will need a blood transfusion at some point in their life. I'm actually one of them. I'm here because some people donated many decades ago. In Owen Sound here, the Legion has been providing a donation center for several decades. I have no idea how far back they go with the provision of their facilities at the Legion for the Red Cross, whether it's blood for cancer patients to car accident victims. The blood transfusion can be a lifesaver. I'd like just to mention thank you to the Legion, the Ladies Auxiliary, who have long provided snacks and beverages for the donors, Legion members, and some various community groups who also assist on donation days with just guiding people and making sure they're fine upon leaving the building. The next donation day, like I said, is December 4th, this Wednesday, and I thank the regular donors and encourage people to look into what may be the best gift this Christmas season, which would be the gift of life. For more information, someone can go to blood.ca for more info or to book an appointment.
I hope you didn't get drowned out there. Brianna, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. We are still looking for applicants for vacancies on city boards and committees. Applications are being accepted until this Friday, December 6th. Applications can be submitted through the city's website or by attending City Hall. So please spread the word to anyone who you think might be interested.
Good, thank you. So I think we're down to motion the committee rise.
Moved by myself that the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
All in favor? That is carried. 19.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that the action taken in Committee of the Whole in considering public meetings, deputations, and presentations, public question period, matters arising from correspondence, reports of city staff, consent agenda, committee minutes, matters postponed, motions for which notice was previously given, and additional business be confirmed by this council.
Great, thanks. All in favor? That is carried. Notices of motion, seeing none coming. Bylaws, Brianna?
Through Your Worship, the bylaws listed for approval on tonight's agenda include the confirmatory bylaw, a bylaw to adopt the amended Records and Information Management Policy, a bylaw to execute an agreement with StoneShare for an electronic document and records management system, a bylaw to execute the documents necessary to transfer City Hall property from the Mayor as trustee and the Corporation of the City of Owen Sound as trustee to the Corporation of the City of Owen Sound alone, a bylaw to amend the zoning bylaw respecting cannabis and food beverage production facilities, a bylaw to execute a facility use agreement with the Ontario Boy Scouts of Canada for the 57th Annual Sunset Area Winter Camp event, and a bylaw to amend the appointed officers bylaw to appoint an inspector and parking enforcement officer.
Great, thank you. Marion?
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thomas, that bylaw numbers 2019-188, 189, 190, 191, 192, 193, and 194 be passed and enacted.
Good, thank you. All in favor? That is carried. So that completes our business for tonight. My computer, it says it is 11 minutes after 9 p.m. Concludes our business. Thanks, everyone. Good night. We're adjourned.